Clara May Holt was still wearing her mourning dress when she sold everything Walt left behind. The mule, the plow, the pocket watch his mother had given him, the bed they'd shared for 11 years. And when the last man walked away with the last thing, she had $54, 2 daughters, and a letter from a stranger in Nevada who needed a wife. She didn't pray about it. She didn't ask anyone's opinion. She put Eliza's hand in her right, Rose's hand in her left, and walked to the train station without looking back at a single thing she was leaving. If this story reaches something inside you, subscribe to this channel right now and follow Clara all the way to the end. Leave a comment and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The platform at Millhaven was crowded for a Tuesday, and the moment Clara stepped off that train, every conversation on it stopped. Not paused, stopped. She felt it the way she always felt it. Not in her ears, but in her skin. That particular quality of air when a group of people shift their attention to you at the same time and don't bother to hide it. She had felt it her whole life. She had stopped letting it slow her down somewhere around age 22, and she was 36 now. And she had more important things to do than manage other people's surprise at the size of her. She turned back to the train steps and held up both arms. "Come on, Rosie." Rose came down with both hands locked around her mother's neck and her face buried in Clara's shoulder, the way she'd slept the entire last day of the journey. "Is this it?" Rose said into Clara's neck. "This is it. It's hot." "It's Nevada. It's supposed to be hot." Eliza jumped down behind them, landed on both feet, and immediately swept the platform with the sharp, cataloging eyes that had been cataloging everything since she was old enough to focus. 12 years old, and she already read a room better than most grown men Clara had known. "People are staring," Eliza said. "I know." "Why?" "Because we're new, and I'm large, and they haven't made up their minds about us yet." Clara shifted Rose to her hip and picked up the leather bag. "They will. Let's find Mr. Callister." "What if he stares too?" "Then we deal with that." "What if he—" "Eliza." Clara looked at her daughter directly. "One thing at a time." Eliza pressed her mouth shut. She stayed close. The man at the far end of the platform wasn't hard to find. He was the only one who wasn't staring. He was standing with his arms crossed and his hat low, and his eyes on the train, not on her. And when her eyes landed on him, she had a single clear thought. That is a man who has been losing something slowly for a long time, and has almost made his peace with it. She walked toward him. The crowd didn't part exactly, but it shifted, the way crowds shifted when they were watching something they'd already decided they had opinions about. Behind her, a woman's voice said, low and carrying, "That's what he sent for?" And another voice said, "Lord have mercy." Eliza turned around. "Keep walking," Clara said. She said, "I heard what she said. Keep walking." "But, Eliza, I need you to keep walking right now." A pause. Then Eliza's footsteps behind her again, sharp and deliberate. The footsteps of a 12-year-old who was complying under protest and wanted that known. Clara stopped 3 feet in front of Wade Callister and held out her hand before he could say a word. "Mr. Callister, I'm Clara Holt. This is Eliza, and this is Rose." She held his eyes. "I believe you've been expecting us." He looked at her. He looked at the girls. He looked at the bag, and then he took her hand and shook it once. Brisk, firm, the handshake of a man conducting a transaction he wasn't entirely sure about. "Mrs. Holt," he said. "Miss, I go by Clara." Clara. Something moved through his expression that she catalogued and set aside to examine later. "The wagon's out front." "Good. Then we should move before this heat gets worse." "It'll get worse regardless," he said. "I know. I said before it does." She looked at him steadily. I don't have any patience for standing still when there's somewhere to be, Mr. Callister. That'll save us both some time to know early. Something shifted in his jaw. Not offense, something closer to recalibration. Wade, he said. You can call me Wade. Wade, she nodded once. Lead the way. The man holding the horses near the wagon was older, with a face that had seen the full length of a hard American life and hadn't looked away from any of it. He tipped his hat before Clara had taken 3 steps toward him. Hank Dupree, ma'am. I run the Broken Spur alongside Wade. He looked at Rose, who had unlocked herself from Clara's neck and was regarding him with the solemn, total attention she gave to everyone she was deciding about. That's a fine hat you've got, miss. Rose touched the brim of her small straw hat. Thank you, she said, in the careful voice she used when she had decided someone was probably trustworthy, but hadn't confirmed it yet. Rose doesn't talk to strangers usually, Eliza said. That's smart, Hank said. She talked to you. That's also smart. Hank held out a hand to help Clara up without making a ceremony of it, which she appreciated, and she took it without making a ceremony of that either, which she could see he appreciated. Eliza climbed up on her own. They were 2 miles out of Millhaven when Wade said, without turning his head, I was straightforward in my letter. You were, Clara said. I said the ranch had been through difficulty. You said 2 hard years. It's been 3. He kept his eyes on the road. I want you to know that going in. I appreciate that. What kind of difficulty? He was quiet for a moment. The cattle. 6 weeks of sickness moving through the herd. Started in the east pasture, spread south. Lost 11 head. What are the symptoms? He glanced at her. The glance of a man who had expected a different question. Bloating. Fever that spikes afternoons and drops at night. Dark discharge. Teeth grinding. The worst ones are down on their knees. What does your vet say? Doc Mercer. Says it's gut fever. Says to cull the worst, wait it out. Did he check your water? Silence. Wade. No. The word came out flat. He didn't. From the wagon bed, Hank said quietly, I mentioned that. You mentioned it was an option, Wade said. I said we ought to check it. I was managing 14 other things. You're always managing 14 other things. Hank's voice carried no heat. Just the weight of a truth said before. That's the problem. Clara looked at the road ahead. What do the cattle drink from? Creek on the south quarter and a trough off the east well. Creek's been running low since April, so mostly the trough. When was the east well dug? She felt the change in him before he spoke. The slight tightening, the breath held a half-second too long. 2 years ago. The old well went dry. We dug deeper. Was it tested when you dug it? Yes. And it was clean? Yes. Then something changed it. She turned to look at him fully. Or someone did. That landed on him. She watched it land. He didn't answer it, which was its own kind of answer, and she tucked that away with the rest of what she was collecting. I want to see the well before anything else, she said. You just spent 3 days on a train. And your cattle have been dying for 6 weeks. I'll sleep when the worst ones are stable. She shifted Rose, who had fallen asleep against her again, with the total confidence of a child who trusted her mother completely to handle whatever came. I need to be straight with you, Wade, the same way you were straight with me. I was a field nurse during the war. I know how to read sick bodies, animal and otherwise, and I know how to read a bad water source. If your well is what I think it is, I can help you. But I need to see it first. Wade was quiet for a long moment. What do you think it is? I think the mineral table underneath your east quarter has been leaching into the water. Sulfur compounds, most likely. It won't drop a grown man unless he drinks heavily from one source for months. But cattle drink differently than men. They drink more. They drink from the same source over and over, and the compounds accumulate in their tissue. She paused. If I'm right, it's been building in their systems for 3 months, maybe more. 6 weeks of visible symptoms is about right for that timeline. Wade's hands tightened on the reins. Doc Mercer didn't say anything about the water. Did Doc Mercer ask about the water? Silence. Wade? No, he said, he didn't. Then he diagnosed what he could see and missed what he couldn't. She kept her voice even, no judgment in it, just fact. It happens, especially when a man's been calling everything gut fever for 15 years and hasn't been wrong often enough to make him look harder. She paused. I'm not saying he's a bad vet. I'm saying he was wrong this time, and your cattle are still dying because of it. Hank said from the back, She's right about the timeline. I've been thinking about that well for 2 months and didn't say it plain enough. You said it, Wade said, not plain enough. It wouldn't have... Wade stopped, started again. I should have listened. It was a hard thing for a man like him to say. Clara could tell that. Not because he was too proud for it exactly, but because saying it meant accounting for 11 dead cattle, and whatever else had been lost in those 2 months he hadn't listened. She didn't push on it. You're listening now, she said. That's what matters. Rose stirred against her shoulder and said, without fully waking, Are we there yet? Almost, baby. Is it nice? Clara looked at Wade's profile. The set jaw, the tired eyes, the hands that had been working this land for years, and were still working it now out of sheer refusal to stop. Then she looked at the land itself the way she always looked at things. Not for what they were, but for what they could be with the right attention. It's going to be nice, she said. Rose accepted that with the complete faith of a 7-year-old and went back to sleep. Eliza, who had been quiet long enough that Clara had almost forgotten she was there, said, What if the well can't be fixed? Then we find another water source, Clara said. What if there isn't one? Eliza, I'm just asking what if. I know you are. There's always another water source. You just have to know how to look. Clara glanced at her daughter. Worry about what's in front of you, not what's around the corner. But what's around the corner affects what's in front of you. That's true, Hank said from the back. She's 12, Clara said to Hank. 12-year-olds can be right, Hank said pleasantly. Don't encourage her. Wasn't planning to stop, Hank said. Eliza's mouth curved just slightly. Clara saw it and said nothing about it. The Broken Spurs east well was behind the barn, and Clara smelled it before she reached it. Not strongly, not in the way that hit you from across the yard. In the subtle, specific way of someone who had learned to use her nose the same way she used her eyes and her hands, as a diagnostic tool, reliable and precise. She held out her hand to Wade without looking at him. Give me a sample vial from my bag. He opened the bag without questioning it, found the small glass vials in the side pocket where she told Hank they'd be on the wagon ride over, and handed her one. She pulled up the bucket herself, leaned over it, smelled it with her eyes closed, the way she'd learned in field tents, with men dying in the cots behind her, and not enough doctors, and not enough time. Then she opened the vial and dipped it, and sealed it, and held it up. There, she said. Eliza was beside her. What am I looking at? The cloudiness. You see it? Barely. That's the point. It's barely enough to see, and more than enough to kill. Clara turned to Wade. Close this well today. Board it over. Fence it off. No cattle within 50 yards. She held the vial up between them. This is what's been making your herd sick for 3 months and killing them for 6 weeks. Wade stared at the vial. He stared at her. You're certain? I'm certain enough to stake your cattle on it, which is what I'm doing. She met his eyes. Are you going to trust me, or do you need more time to decide? He was quiet for 3 full seconds. She let him have them. A man who made decisions that fast on something this consequential wasn't thinking. He was reacting. She didn't want his reaction. She wanted his judgment. What do you need? He said. Activated charcoal, apple cider vinegar, dried burdock root if Millhaven carries it, clean salt, 2 pounds at least, and someone who can ride to town right now. She turned to Hank. Can you go tonight? Already thinking about it, Hank said, and she handed him the list she'd started writing on the wagon, because she'd known this was where they were going to end up. Hank read it. Burdock root's a stretch. Gilroy's might not carry it. If they don't, get dried milk thistle instead. Same action, slightly slower, still effective. She looked at him. The charcoal is not optional. Get it first if he's running low on stock. Yes, ma'am. Hank folded the list. He looked at Wade with the expression of a man who had something to say and was deciding whether now was the time. It was the time. In town yesterday, Pete Garner at the supply store mentioned Edgar North was in asking questions. Wade went still. What questions? About the herd, about the loan payments, about whether there was talk of the East Quarter going up. Hank turned his hat over in his hands. Pete didn't think much of it at the time. Now he's thinking about it. Clara looked between them. Who is Edgar North? Neither man answered immediately, which was its own answer. Wade, she said. A man who's been wanting this land for 2 years. His voice was level, the specific levelness of someone keeping something tamped down by force of will. He's got a water contract that runs through my east boundary. If I sell or go under, he gets the contract and the land both. And now your cattle are sick. And now my cattle are sick. And your well, she paused, that was clean 2 years ago and isn't anymore. The 3 of them stood there in the last of the evening light, and nobody said the thing they were all thinking, because saying it out loud made it real in a way that required an immediate response, and they weren't ready for that response yet. Finally, Hank said, quiet and careful, I don't know for certain those things are connected. No, Clara said, but you think they might be. He didn't answer. Which was the answer? She looked at Wade. He was staring at the boarded-up well with his hands at his sides and his jaw doing that controlled, grinding thing. And she could see what was moving through him. Not just anger, though there was plenty of that, but the particular agony of a man who had been losing something slowly and was only now beginning to understand that the losing might not have been random. Wade, she said. He turned. Your cattle are sick right now. Tonight. That's the thing in front of us. She held his eyes. Whatever else this is, and I'm not saying it's nothing, it waits until we've done what can be done tonight. You understand me? He looked at her for a long moment. You'd stay up all night with them. I would. You don't know these animals. I know sick, she said. That's enough. Something moved across his face, raw and brief and quickly managed, but she saw it. The worst one, he said. He's been down since yesterday afternoon. Show me. He turned toward the east pen. She followed. Behind her, Eliza said to Rose, who had appeared from somewhere near the water trough with her hand extended toward a dog of uncertain origin. Rose, let him smell your hand first. He already smelled it, Rose said. His name is Captain. That is not his name. I didn't name him. I found out his name. That is not how names work. It's how his name works. His name's Burr, Wade said without turning around. Short for burro. He followed a pack mule home 2 winters ago. A pause. Then Rose said, with perfect serenity, He told me it's Captain now. Clara heard Wade make a sound. She didn't look back to see what his face was doing, but she heard Hank murmur something that sounded like quiet laughter, and she tucked that small warmth away like a coal against the long, cold night she knew was coming. The worst one was in the far corner of the east pen, on his side, breathing with the concentrated deliberateness of an animal putting everything it had into the simple act of continuing. Clara crouched beside him and put her hands on his neck and his belly, and felt the fever and the weakness and the specific quality of an animal that was still fighting but wouldn't be much longer without help. Behind her, Wade stood at the gate. Eliza stood beside him with her arms crossed, watching her mother work with the focused attention she gave to everything Clara did in a crisis. Rose had followed them and was standing on the lowest fence rail, with Captain, formerly Burr, beside her, both of them watching with the same serious regard. "Can you save him?" Eliza asked. "I don't know yet," Clara said. "Hand me the bag." Eliza handed it over the fence without being asked twice. "What's his name?" Clara asked Wade. Wade was quiet for a moment. "Haven't named them." Clara's hands didn't stop moving. "You named the horses. The cattle are—" "I know what you're going to say." She glanced back at him. "Name this one." "That's not—" "A man fights harder for something he's named. You know that's true." She turned back to the animal. "What would you call him?" The silence stretched long enough that Eliza looked up at Wade with frank curiosity. "Flint," Wade said finally, the way a man said something he hadn't planned to say. "He's stubborn as flint. Always has been." "Flint." Clara put her hand flat on the animal's neck. "All right, Flint. You're not done yet. You hear me? I didn't come all this way to watch things die." She looked up at Wade over her shoulder. "Get me the lantern, and warm water, as warm as your stove can manage. And then go board up that well before it gets full dark." Wade didn't move for 1 second. He was looking at her hands on the animal, at the sure, unhurried way they moved, at his daughter on the fence rail and his dog beside her, and the woman he'd sent for from Nevada, who had been on his property for less than 2 hours and was already in his east pen talking a dying animal back from the edge. "Wade," Hank said quietly from behind him. "Lantern." Wade went. Hank came to the fence gate, hat in hands, and looked at Clara for a moment. "Miss Clara." "Hank?" "You sure about this? Staying up all night?" She looked at Flint's face, at the clouded, struggling eye, at the effort of every breath. "I've sat with worse," she said, "in worse places, with worse odds." She paused. "And most of them made it." Hank nodded slowly. "And the ones that didn't?" "I stayed with those too," she said, "until the end." He was quiet. Then, "I'll be back from town before midnight." "I know you will." She didn't look up. "Go fast." He went fast. And Clara May Holt knelt in the dirt of a dying ranch in Nevada on the first night of her new life, with her daughters watching from the fence, and a stranger bringing her a lantern, and a man who might have been trying to steal everything they were all fighting for right now, watching from the dark. And she put her hands on a sick animal, and she got to work. She had not survived Walt's death, and the debt, and Missouri, and 20 years of a world that looked at her body before it looked at her, and decided it already knew everything it needed to know. She had not survived all of that to fail on the first night. She was here. The animals were sick. Flint was still breathing. That was enough to start. Hank came back at 10:30 with everything on the list and something extra he hadn't been sent for. A covered tin of cornbread from Dorothy Price at the boarding house, who had heard there was a new woman at the Broken Spur, and had apparently decided that new women needed feeding before they needed anything else. Clara didn't stop working when Hank came into the pen. She held out her hand for the charcoal without looking up, and Hank put it there with the practiced ease of someone who had assisted in emergencies before, and knew that the person running the emergency didn't need commentary, just materials. "Burdock root," she said. "Gilroy's was out. Got the milk thistle." "Good. Set it by the gate." She measured the charcoal with her palm, the way she'd measured things in field tents when the measuring cups were being used for something else. "The vinegar?" 2 gallons. Wasn't sure if one was enough." "It wasn't, thank you." She mixed the dose with water in the bucket she'd had warming near the lantern, added the precise amount of salt, stirred it with a stick she'd stripped clean, and looked at Flint. He was still on his side, but his breathing had changed in the last hour. Less concentrated, less like a man holding a door shut against a flood. More like a man who had felt the flood recede a few inches and wasn't sure yet whether to trust it. "Come on, Flint," she said. Not to anyone, just to him. "This is going to taste terrible, and it's going to help you. Open up." He didn't cooperate at first. He turned his head away with the stubborn torpor of a sick animal that had stopped believing help was coming. Clara put her hand on the side of his jaw and held it steady, and kept talking, low and rhythmic. The same tone she'd used in the war when boys of 19 were dying, and the most honest thing she could give them was the sound of a calm human voice, telling them they were not alone. "There you are," she said when he finally accepted the tube. "There you are. That's right." Behind her, from the fence rail, Rose said in a whisper that was not remotely a whisper, "Is he going to be okay?" "Go to bed, Rose," Clara said. "I'm not tired." "Eliza." "She's not tired," Eliza said. "Neither am I." "Both of you. Inside." "But what if—" "I will come and tell you in the morning how he is. That is a promise. Now go inside and take your sister." A pause. "Please." The please was what did it. Clara didn't use it often, which meant when she did, the girls knew she meant it fully. The sound of footsteps, then the screen door, then quiet. Hank settled himself on an overturned crate near the gate, with the comfortable posture of a man who had also decided he wasn't leaving. He didn't offer to help, and he didn't ask questions. He just sat there, which was exactly what she needed, and after a while, he started talking, in the low, easy way of someone filling silence with something worth filling it with. "Wade built this ranch from 60 acres, he said. "Bought it with money he'd saved working cattle drives for 8 years. Slept in a bedroll for 2 years before he had walls." He turned his hat in his hands. Ellen, his wife, she was the one who made it a home. After she passed, he just kept the ranch running, kept it going. Like if he stopped moving, the whole thing would fall down. "How long ago?" Clara asked. 4 years this December. She worked without speaking for a moment. "He blame himself?" Hank was quiet. "She got the fever in November. By the time Doc Mercer decided it was serious, it was too late for serious to mean anything." He paused. "Wade carried her to the bed himself every night for 3 weeks. Man didn't sleep more than 2 hours at a stretch. So whether he blames himself," he let that hang. "I think he blames the fact that he couldn't fix it. That's different from blame, but it lives in the same house." Clara sat back on her heels for a moment and looked at Flint's face. His eye was slightly clearer than it had been an hour ago. Slightly. She didn't let herself feel too much about that yet. "Edgar North," she said. "Tell me everything." Hank told her. All of it. North had come to the county 12 years ago with money from back east and had spent those 12 years acquiring things. Land, contracts, the goodwill of the county commissioners, the patience of a man who understood that waiting was just another form of work. He had the water contract for the Eastern Irrigation District, which ran through a corner of the Broken Spur property, And he'd been trying to buy that corner since Wade's first hard year. Each time Wade refused, North found a new angle. A competing grazing claim, a boundary dispute over the fence line, a letter to the county about the creek usage. Never enough to win, always enough to cost. "And now the cattle," Clara said. "And now the cattle." "The well was tested 2 years ago. You said it was clean." "Clean as creek water." Hank looked at his hat. "I was there when they tested it. Wade tested it himself, matter of fact, with a kit he'd ordered from Denver. Clean." "And then it wasn't." "And then the cattle started dying." Clara looked at him directly. "Hank, if a man wanted to contaminate a well on his neighbor's property, how close would he need to get?" The silence that followed was the kind that had weight. "There's a drainage channel," Hank said slowly, "that runs from North's south pasture down along the fence line and cuts within 30 yards of the east well. It's been there for years. Always ran clean." He paused. "I haven't walked that channel recently." "Walk it tomorrow," she said. "First thing, before Wade sees you do it." "Why before Wade?" "Because if you find something, I want to know before he does." She turned back to Flint. "Wade's a man who acts. I need to know what we're acting toward before he goes off in a direction that costs us." Hank was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You've known him for 6 hours." "I've known men like him my whole life," she said. "My father was one. My husband was one. Good men. Hard workers. The kind who hit a wall and put their head down and hit it again, because standing back to look at the wall feels too much like giving up." She mixed a second dose, smaller, for the follow-up. "The wall is not always the problem. Sometimes the wall is just where someone wants you looking, while they do the real damage somewhere else." Hank didn't answer for a long time. Then he said, "I'm glad he sent that letter." "So am I," Clara said. And she meant it, though she hadn't expected to mean it quite so fully, quite this soon. Wade came back at midnight. Clara heard his boots on the ground before she saw the light from his lantern, and she noted, without comment, that he walked quietly for a man his size. He stopped at the pen gate and looked at Flint and then at her, and she could see him reading the situation the same way she read water samples, looking for the information that was there, regardless of what he hoped it would say. "He's stable," she said. "Not out of it yet, but stable." Wade let out a breath, just one, controlled. "The others?" "The 2 on their knees are responding to the vinegar treatment. I want to dose them again at 4 in the morning. The rest should turn a corner once they're off the tainted water fully." She stood, steadied herself against the rail, and turned to face him. "I need to ask you something." "All right." "The drainage channel on the east fence line, north side. When did you last walk it?" He went very still. "Why?" "Hank's going to walk it tomorrow. I want to know what you remember about it from the last time you did." He looked at her for a long moment, reading her the same way she'd been reading him since the platform. "It ran clean in April," he said. "I walked the whole east line in April. It was normal." "And between April and now?" "I haven't had time to—" He stopped. Something moved through his face. "I haven't walked it since April." "Then something happened between April and now." She held his eyes. "I'm not saying I know what. I'm saying we need to know before we do anything else." Wade's jaw tightened, then released, then tightened again. She watched him work through it, the anger that wanted to move fast, and the judgment that knew fast wasn't the same as right. "You think North did something to my well," he said, not a question. "I think your well was clean, and now it isn't. And that's not a thing that happens by accident in this kind of geology. She paused. I think we need evidence before we say that to anyone but the two of us and Hank. If he poisoned my water, Wade, 11 cattle are dead. I know. 11. I know, and I'm angry about that for you, and I understand what you want to do about it. She took one step closer. But a man who rides onto his neighbor's property with accusation and no proof gives that neighbor every tool he needs to make himself the injured party. You understand me? He looked at her with the strained, contained energy of a man holding a horse that wanted to run. I understand you. Then let Hank walk the channel in the morning, and let's see what he finds. She met his eyes. Can you do that? A long pause. I can do that. Thank you. He looked at Flint, at the slow, steadier breathing, at the way Clara had arranged the lantern so the warmth of it fell across the animal's flank. You've been in here for 5 hours. I have. When did you last eat? She thought about it. Kansas City. That was 2 days ago. The train food was, she paused, optimistic about what it was. Something shifted in his face. He set his lantern down and went to the gate and came back 2 minutes later with the tin of cornbread Hank had brought from Dorothy Price, and he handed it over the fence without ceremony. And Clara took it without ceremony. And that was the whole of it. She ate. It was good. She said so. And he said Dorothy Price made the best cornbread in 3 counties, and Clara said she'd remember to thank her, and he said Dorothy would appreciate that. She kept inventory of her debts and her credits with equal precision. She like that about most people? Clara asked. She's like that about everyone. He settled against the fence post, not leaving, not exactly staying, something in between. The way a man stayed near something he wasn't sure how to name yet. She was the first person in town who was decent to Ellen when we came here. Ellen was from back east, Philadelphia. People had opinions. People always have opinions, Clara said. She didn't let them make her small. He said it quietly. Ellen. She just kept being exactly who she was, until the opinions got tired and went home. Clara looked at him. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at Flint, or at some middle distance that wasn't the pen at all. She sounds like she was something, Clara said. She was everything, he said. Simple, final. The way a man said a true thing that had no qualifications. Clara didn't try to answer that. There was nothing to answer. She ate the last of the cornbread and set the tin aside and went back to checking Flint's temperature with her palm. Around 2 a.m, Hank fell asleep on his crate and started snoring with the wholehearted commitment of a man who had earned it. Clara and Wade were quiet for a long time, the kind of quiet that happens between people who have run out of the things strangers say and haven't yet decided what comes next. Finally, Wade said, "Why did you really answer the advertisement?" She thought about how to answer it honestly, without answering it completely. And then she decided that dishonest honesty was a luxury she couldn't afford right now, and maybe ever. Because I had $54 and 2 daughters and a town full of people who had decided what I was before I opened my mouth, she said. Because my husband left me debt and not much else, and I don't say that meanly. Walt Holt was a decent man who worked hard and died too soon. But the decency and the hard work didn't leave much to live on. She paused. And because I read your letter 3 times and I thought, that man is not lying to me. He's not telling me everything, but what he's telling me is true. And I can work with true. Wade was quiet. And you had 2 daughters, he said. I had 2 daughters. Most men advertising for a wife don't want, I know that. She kept her voice even. I know exactly what most men advertising for a wife want, and what they don't want. And I read your letter, looking for the part where you said it, and it wasn't there." She glanced at him. Was it an oversight? He looked back at her, directly, the way he'd been doing since the platform. Not the stare of judgment, but the attention of a man actually looking. "No," he said. "It wasn't an oversight." She nodded once and turned back to Flint. At 4 in the morning, Flint lifted his head. Just that. Just lifted it off the ground and held it up, and looked at Clara with the dull, exhausted eyes of an animal that had been through something and was beginning to understand that the through was maybe the whole of it. Clara put both hands on the side of his face and looked back at him and said, very quietly, "There you are." Wade was at the fence gate. She hadn't heard him move, but he was there, and she heard the breath he let out, long and ragged at the edges. The breath of a man releasing something he'd been holding for 6 weeks. "He's going to make it," she said. Not a promise, a direction she was setting. "You don't know that yet." "I know it right now," she said. "Right now he's lifted his head and his eyes are tracking, and he's fighting. That's enough to know right now." She stood up slowly. Her legs had been folded under her for 2 hours, and they made their displeasure known as she straightened. She gripped the fence rail and breathed through it, and when she let go, her legs held steady. Wade opened the pen gate and came inside and stood beside Flint, and put his hand on the animal's neck the way a man touched something he'd been afraid of losing. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Hank woke up on his crate, looked around, saw Flint's head up, and said, "Well, Lord Almighty," with the sincere gratitude of a man receiving good news he'd prayed for, without admitting he was praying. "Go back to sleep, Hank," Clara said. "I wasn't asleep," Hank said, and lay back down on the crate and was asleep again inside 30 seconds. Clara almost laughed. She felt Wade look at her when she almost laughed, and she felt him decide something in that moment, though she couldn't have said what exactly. Only that the quality of his attention shifted, like a key turning over. "Thank you," he said. Low, plain, no decoration on it. "For staying." "You don't have to thank me for that." "I know I don't have to." He kept his eyes on Flint. "I want to." She looked at the side of his face, at the exhaustion in it, and the relief, and the something else that she was not going to name yet because it was too early, and she was too tired, and there was still too much that could go wrong before any of it meant anything. "Get some sleep," she said. "Hank's walking the channel at first light. You need to be rested enough to think straight when he comes back with what he finds." He looked at her. "What makes you sure he'll find something?" "Because your well was clean, and now it isn't. And you lost 11 cattle. And Edgar North has been patient about wanting your land for 2 years, she said. Patient men don't stay patient when the clock runs out. They act. They just act in the dark, so no one sees them do it. He was quiet for a moment. "And if there's evidence?" "Then we go to the county sheriff with it, properly, with documentation and witnesses and everything laid out so clean that North's lawyer can't find a thread to pull." She held his gaze. "This is not a fight you win with anger, Wade. It's a fight you win with evidence. You understand the difference?" "I understand the difference," he said. "Understanding it and feeling it are 2 separate things." "I know," she said. "Feel it all you want. Just don't act on it until we know what we're holding." She turned toward the pen gate. "Now go sleep. I'll be in before sunrise." He didn't move immediately. She could feel him standing there, with the lantern light behind him and whatever he was carrying. The grief and the anger and the 6 weeks of slow disaster and the 11 dead cattle and Ellen 4 years gone, and this whole complicated situation that had arrived on his platform that afternoon with a leather bag and 2 daughters, and more capability than he'd known how to account for. "Clara," he said. She turned. He looked at her. His expression was not guarded the way it usually was, the way it had been all evening. Some layer of that had worn off in the last few hours. The way exhaustion wore off the careful face a person put on for the world and left the real one underneath. "I'm glad you came," he said. It was not a complicated sentence. It was not a declaration, or a negotiation, or anything other than exactly what it was. She felt it land in the specific, undefended place that honest, simple things landed when you were too tired to redirect them. "So am I," she said, and meant it in full. She walked out of the pen into the dark pre-dawn air, and left him there with his hand on his horse and the lantern burning, and the long work of the morning still ahead of them, carrying the quiet certainty that whatever Hank found in that channel at first light was going to change the shape of every day that came after it. Hank found it before sunrise. Clara was in the kitchen with a cup of coffee she hadn't tasted yet when she heard his boots on the porch, and she knew from the particular weight of his step, not fast, not slow, but deliberate in the way of a man who had found something he needed to carry carefully, that he had not walked that channel and come back empty. She opened the door before he knocked. He looked at her. He looked at the coffee. He said, "I'm going to need some of that." She poured it. He sat down at the kitchen table and wrapped both hands around the cup, and didn't drink it, just held it, the way people held warm things when they needed something to hold. "Tell me," she said. "The channel runs clean for the first quarter mile," he said. "North side, right along the fence line. Normal. Nothing off about it." He paused. "Then there's a section about 30 yards from the east well where someone dug a lateral cut. Small. Not something you'd see from the road, or even from the fence, unless you were looking at ground level." Clara set down her cup. "It redirects a portion of the channel flow toward the well casing," Hank said. "Not directly into the well, just close enough that whatever's in the water seeps down through the soil and into the water table underneath." He looked at his hands. "It's been there a while. The edges are settled. I'd say 3 months, maybe 4. "That matches the contamination timeline," Clara said. "Yes, it does." "Did you touch anything?" "No, ma'am. I looked at it the way you told me, from a distance. Then I walked the rest of the channel and came back." He finally drank the coffee. "There's something else." She waited. "At the cut site, in the mud on the north side of the bank." He looked at her steadily. "Boot prints, big ones, and the impression of a post digger, the kind you use to drive fence posts or cut narrow drainage channels." "North's men," Clara said. "Can't prove that," Hank said. "But North's property runs right up to that fence line, and there's no reason any of our people would be on that side of the channel." He paused. "And I found a burlap sack snagged on a root downstream, the kind Pete Garner stocks at the supply store for bulk chemicals." The kitchen was very quiet. Clara stood up and went to the window and looked out at the yard. Not because there was anything to see, but because she needed a moment to arrange what she was feeling into something she could work with. There was anger in it. She recognized it without letting it take the wheel. "Where's Wade?" she said. "Still in the barn. He's been up since 4, checking on Flint." "Don't tell him yet." "Clara, not yet, Hank." She turned. "I need to think about how we do this before he knows. Because the moment he knows, he's going to want to ride straight to North's property. And that is exactly what North is waiting for him to do." Hank was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. She sat back down. "We need the sheriff before we do anything else." "Who is he?" "Art Colton, county sheriff out of Brentwood, 12 miles east. Decent man. Old. Been around long enough to know when he's being played. Hank turned his cup. He and North aren't friends, but they're not enemies either. North's donated to the county fund twice in the last 3 years. So he has goodwill in the bank. Some. Which means we walk into that sheriff's office with more than a burlap sack and a boot print. She thought for a moment. I want to document the cattle, formally. Dates, symptoms, progression, treatment response, source identification. I've been keeping notes since last night, but I need to write them up clean. The kind of document a judge could read. She looked at Hank. Can you get paper and ink from town without making it look like you're doing anything specific? I can get paper and ink. I go in for supplies twice a week. Nobody'll think twice. Good.
And I want you to go back to that channel today and make a sketch. Distance from the well, the direction of the cut, the dimensions as best you can estimate. Don't measure it with anything, just your eye and your paces. I can do that. And the burlap sack, don't touch it, don't move it. Just mark where it is in the sketch. Hank looked at her with the expression she was beginning to recognize. Not quite surprise, not quite admiration. Something between the two that was specific to a man watching someone do a thing well that he doubted they could do. You've done something like this before, he said. During the war, when supplies went missing. Someone had to document it. The officers didn't want to. It was paperwork, and it was slow, and it made them feel like they weren't doing the real work. She picked up her coffee. I did it for 3 years. I got good at it. The screen door opened, and Eliza came in, with Rose behind her, and Captain, who was formerly Burr, behind Rose, though the dog stopped at the door with the discipline of an animal who had learned that kitchens were negotiable territory. How's Flint? Eliza said immediately. Better than last night. Eliza's shoulders dropped 1 inch with relief she was trying not to show. I knew he'd be okay, she said. You did not know that, Rose said. You said to me last night that you were worried. I said I was cautiously optimistic. You said you were worried, and then you used different words. That is not the same thing. Girls, Clara said, not loudly. They stopped. Rose came and pressed herself against Clara's side and looked at Hank with her serious round eyes. Good morning, Mr. Hank. Morning, Miss Rose. He looked at the dog in the doorway. Captain? The dog's tail moved once in acknowledgement. His name is actually Burr, Eliza told Rose, for what was clearly not the first time. His name is Captain, Rose said, for what was clearly also not the first time. Clara put her hand on Rose's hair. Eat something, both of you. There's bread in the tin, and I think there are eggs if someone wants to check the coop. I'll check, Eliza said, because Eliza was the kind of child who preferred tasks to waiting, which was the quality Clara was most grateful for in her and most tired by in equal measure. She went out. Rose sat at the table beside Hank and regarded him with the calm attention of someone who had decided to trust him and was now simply in his company, comfortable as a cat. Mr. Hank, Rose said, is the bad man going to take the ranch? Clara looked at her daughter. What bad man? The one you and Mr. Hank were talking about, with the channel. Rose looked back at her with the expression that meant she had heard everything and had been processing it quietly since. I wasn't eavesdropping. I was sitting on the stairs. That's different. Hank pressed his lips together. Clara looked at her daughter for a long moment. No, she said. He's not going to take the ranch. How do you know? Because we're not going to let him. Rose considered this with the seriousness she gave to all logical propositions. Okay, she said, and reached for the bread tin. Hank met Clara's eyes over Rose's head. There was something in his face that was close to the thing Wade's face had done the night before, when the layers came off. Something that said he had not expected this, and was still deciding what to do with not having expected it. The barn door opened across the yard, and Wade came out. Clara watched him through the window, the set of his shoulders, the way he looked toward the east pen first, automatically, before he looked anywhere else. He was a man who oriented himself by the thing he was responsible for. She understood that completely. She went outside. He was halfway across the yard when he saw her and stopped. "Flint drank this morning," he said. "On his own." "Good. Not much, but something." "That's the turn," she said. "Once they start drinking on their own, the body starts doing the rest." She walked toward him and stopped a few feet away. "I need to talk to you about something." He read her face. "Hank found something in the channel." It wasn't a question. She said, "Yes." He was very still. "What?" She told him all of it. The lateral cut, the direction of the flow toward the well casing, the boot prints, the burlap sack. She told it the way she told things, plainly, in order, without softening the facts or dramatizing them. She watched his face while she talked, and she watched the anger move through it like weather, slow and total and low to the ground, the way the worst storms were. When she finished, he turned and walked away from her toward the fence, and stood there with both hands on the top rail and his back to her, and said nothing for a full minute. She let him have it. When he turned back around, his face was controlled again, but it was the control of a man who had won a fight with himself by a narrow margin. "He killed 11 of my cattle," Wade said. "Yes. Deliberately. That's what the evidence suggests. He sat at my fence line at church last Easter and asked me how the herd was doing." His voice was very quiet. "He shook my hand." "I know." "He shook my hand, Clara." "I know." She held his eyes. "And he's going to answer for that. But not today, and not the way you're thinking about it right now." She took one step toward him. "Wade, look at me." He looked at her. "What you want to do right now is ride over to his property and put the evidence in his face and make him account for it in front of you directly. I understand that. It's the right instinct for a decent man who's been wronged." She held his gaze. "But North is not a decent man. He's a patient one. And a patient man who's been doing wrong in the dark is prepared for the moment the light comes on. He's had months to build a story. You ride over there today with accusation and anger. He uses that story, and he uses your anger, and he walks away clean." Wade's jaw worked. "So I do nothing." "You do the right thing, which is not nothing." She paused. "We go to Sheriff Colton in Brentwood. Today. With Hank's sketch and my medical documentation, and Pete Garner's testimony, if he'll give it. We build a case before North knows we're building it." "And if Colton's not interested in going against North?" "Then we find a judge in the next county who is." She didn't look away. "This is not a fast fight, Wade. I'm not going to pretend it is. But it's a winnable one if we're smart about it, and it's a losing one if we're not." He stood there for a long moment. She could see the war in him, the part that knew she was right, and the part that had been working this land for years and had lost 11 animals to a man who had shaken his hand at Easter. "I hate this," he said. "I know you do. Doing it the careful way, while he's still out there. I know. 11 head, Clara. I know." She kept her voice steady and level and present, the way she'd kept it in the field hospitals, when men needed her to be the steadiest thing in the room. "And when this is done, and the evidence is documented, and the sheriff has seen it, and the judge has heard it, Edgar North is going to lose a great deal more than 11 cattle. He's going to lose his water contract, and his standing in this county, and whatever else a court decides he owes you." She paused. "But that only happens if we do it right. Can you do it right?" The pause that followed was the longest he'd taken. "Yes," he said. "I can do it right." "Good." They went to Brentwood that afternoon, the three of them, Wade and Hank on horseback, and Clara in the wagon with her documentation folded in the medical bag on her lap. She'd spent the morning writing it up at the kitchen table, while Eliza, unbidden, kept Rose occupied outside and out of the way, which was the most helpful thing Eliza had done since Missouri, and Clara noted it with a gratitude she intended to express properly later. The documentation was 12 pages: dates, symptoms, progression charts, treatment protocols, response rates, source identification, contamination analysis, timeline correlation. She had drawn a diagram of the well casing and the contamination pathway in the margin of the last page, because she had discovered in 3 years of wartime nursing that men with authority made decisions faster when they could see a picture. Sheriff Art Colton was a man of 60 with a gray mustache and the unhurried eyes of someone who had heard most things and was no longer surprised by any of them. He looked at Clara when she walked in with the same evaluating look she'd gotten on the platform, and she met it with the same chin-up steadiness she'd brought to every evaluating look in her life. And after 2 seconds, he nodded once and gestured to the chair across from his desk, as if that question had been settled. She sat. She laid the documentation on his desk. She waited while he read it. He read it slowly. She appreciated that. A man who read slowly was a man who was actually reading. Halfway through, he said, without looking up, "You were a field nurse." 3 years. Tennessee and Virginia mostly. This reads like military documentation. It's meant to. He turned a page. The lateral cut in the channel. You say, Hank Dupree observed this morning. At first light. I asked him not to touch anything. He made a sketch. She slid the sketch across the desk. Hank had done it carefully, with distances paced out and the positions of the boot prints marked with small crosses, and the burlap sack's location indicated with a note about what type it was. Colton looked at the sketch for a long time. Then he set it down and looked at Wade. "This is a serious accusation." "It's a serious crime," Wade said. His voice was controlled. Clara had watched him rebuild that control the whole ride over, and she was watching him maintain it now with the careful attention of someone who had said she'd handle this, but needed him not to break it open. "North's got standing in this county," Colton said. "He's also got 3 months of deliberate contamination and 11 dead cattle, and a drainage cut he has no legitimate reason to have dug," Clara said. "The standing doesn't change the evidence, Sheriff. It just changes how carefully you need to document your response to it." Colton looked at her. "You always talk like that? Like what? Like you already know where the conversation's going." "I talk like the facts are the facts," she said. "I find it saves time." He almost smiled. He picked up the documentation again and read the last 3 pages and set it down and looked at his desk for a moment, with the expression of a man making a calculation that involved more variables than the obvious ones. "I can't ride out to North's property on the basis of a sketch and a burlap sack," he said. "Not without more." "Then come to the Broken Spur," Clara said. "See the channel yourself. See the well. See the cattle." She paused. "Bring someone who can take formal measurements of the cut and photograph it if you have the equipment." "I've got a camera," he said, slowly, like he was deciding while he was saying it. "Deputy uses it for accident documentation." "Then use it for this." He looked at Wade. "You understand if I come out there and document this and take it to the county judge, North is going to know within a day. He's got people." "I know he's got people," Wade said. "I'm not asking you to be quiet about it. I'm asking you to be official about it first." Something shifted in Colton's expression. A degree of respect that hadn't been there at the start of the conversation. "All right," he said. "I'll come out Thursday morning." "Tomorrow," Clara said. Colton looked at her. "Mrs. Holt, Miss. And the cut in that channel is open right now, and it's been raining east of here for 2 days. And if that channel runs heavy tonight, it may wash evidence downstream." She held his eyes. "Tomorrow morning, Sheriff. Early." He held her gaze for a long moment. She did not look away. "Tomorrow morning," he said. 7 o'clock. She nodded. "We'll have coffee." He almost smiled again. She was beginning to think almost smiling was as far as Art Colton went. Which was fine. She didn't need his smile. She needed his badge and his camera and his 7 o'clock. They had both. On the way out, in the front room of the sheriff's office, a man was sitting on the bench by the door. Clara noticed him the way she noticed everything, automatically, comprehensively, and without showing that she'd noticed. Big, well-dressed for the county, watching the door to Colton's office with the patient, focused attention of someone waiting for news. She didn't look at him directly. She walked to the wagon and climbed up and waited until Wade and Hank had mounted, and they were moving down the road before she said, quietly, "The man on the bench inside." "I saw him," Wade said. "North's man?" "North's foreman, Dellard." His voice was even. "He wasn't there when we went in." "No," Clara said. "He wasn't." They rode in silence for a moment. Then Hank said from behind them, "So North knows we went to the sheriff." "By tonight," Clara said, "if not sooner." "Which means he's going to move before Thursday," Wade said. "Yes." She looked at the road ahead. "Which means we need to move first." She turned to Wade. "Does North hold any paper on this ranch? Any debt, any contract, anything with your name and his?" Wade's hands tightened on his reins. She felt it rather than saw it, a change in the air beside her. "The grazing contract," he said. "North owns the southern water easement. I pay him a quarterly fee for access to that irrigation line." A pause. "It's due in 3 weeks." "How much?" He said a number. It was not a small number. Clara kept her face steady. "And if you can't pay it?" "He can move to terminate the easement and block access to the south irrigation for the season." He said it the way a man said a thing he'd been not saying. "Without that irrigation, the south pasture goes dry. Without the south pasture, I can't carry the herd through to November." "So he doesn't need to win in court," Clara said. "He just needs to make you miss that payment." "And with the cattle losses and the treatment costs, you can't make it." "Not without selling something." His jaw was set. "I've been turning that over since spring, trying to find the number. It doesn't work." Clara was quiet for a moment. The wagon moved. The road went on ahead of them, and behind them the town of Brentwood receded. And somewhere back there, Edgar North's foreman was putting on his hat and walking to his horse to carry a message to a patient man who had just discovered that his patience had run out on him. "How much are the cattle worth?" she said. "The ones that are recovering." "If they recover fully? Good market weight, good season?" He thought about it. "Enough. Not enough for the payment plus operating, but enough for the payment." "Then we sell them at market before the payment is due." "They're not at market weight. They're sick." "They're recovering. By the time we get them to market—" She stopped, did the math in her head. "When's the next drive?" "Stockton Run leaves from Miller's Creek in 4 weeks." "Then we have 4 weeks to get them to wait." She looked at him. "Can it be done?" He was quiet for a long moment. She watched him do what he did. Look at the problem from the inside, from every angle. The way a man did when the problem was his life, and he'd been carrying it long enough to know all its dimensions. "Maybe," he said. With the right feed, and if the recovery holds, and if nothing else goes wrong. Nothing else is going to go wrong, she said. Not if I have anything to say about it. Hank said from behind them, very quietly. She said that about Flint, too. Wade looked over his shoulder at Hank. Flint lifted his head, Hank said simply. Wade turned back to the road. He didn't say anything for a long time. Clara let him be quiet. She'd learned in the last 24 hours that his quiet was not absence. It was the sound of a man processing something that mattered to him, working it through in the part of himself that didn't have words yet. When he spoke, it was low and direct, the way he said the things that cost him something. When I wrote that advertisement, he said, I was thinking about practical things. Someone to manage the house, someone capable, someone who wouldn't be frightened off by the work. He kept his eyes on the road. I wasn't thinking about any of this. No, Clara said. Neither was I. You came here to build a life, not to fight a land war. I came here to build a life, she said. And this is what the life has in it right now. So this is what we deal with. She paused. I've never run from a hard thing, Wade. That's not something I'm going to start now. He was quiet again. Then, so low she almost missed it under the sound of the horses and the creak of the wagon. I'm glad you're not. She didn't answer that. It didn't need an answer. It needed exactly what she gave it, which was to sit beside him on that wagon seat and look at the road ahead and let it be true without needing to examine it. The broken spur came into view in the late afternoon with the dust of the drive still on them and the weight of everything they'd learned sitting between them like a third passenger. And from the east pen, faint but unmistakable, came the sound of something moving. Steady footsteps, the soft impact of hooves on packed earth. Flint was standing, not still, moving, walking the pen on his own with the slow, deliberate progress of an animal that had been on its back for 2 days and was reminding itself how legs worked. Eliza was on the fence rail watching him. When she heard the wagon, she turned and shouted across the yard at a volume that startled every horse on the property. He's walking! Mama, he's walking on his own! Rose appeared from the barn at a dead run, Captain at her heels, and she stopped at the pen fence and watched Flint with her hands pressed together in front of her chest, like a prayer that had just been answered. Clara stepped down from the wagon and stood there and looked at the animal she had spent the night keeping alive, walking circles in the Nevada dust on his own 4 feet. She felt Wade come to stand beside her. You were right, he said, quietly, meaning more than just Flint. I usually am, she said. It's a blessing and an inconvenience in equal measure. Behind them, Hank made a sound that was pure laughter, and Eliza looked at them both from the fence rail with the measuring eyes that were always measuring, and Rose said to Flint with complete confidence, I knew you'd be okay. Mama stayed with you. And somewhere 12 miles east, a patient man had just learned that his patience was going to cost him far more than he had planned for. But that reckoning was coming toward them, not away, and they were going to need to be ready for it. What none of them knew yet, standing in that yard in the long slant of the afternoon sun, with a recovering horse and a fight that was just beginning to show its full shape, was that Edgar North's next move was not going to come through a lawyer or a foreman or a channel cut in the dark. It was going to come through the one angle none of them had thought to watch. The angle came through the children. Clara didn't know that yet when she woke on Wednesday morning to find Eliza sitting at the kitchen table with a piece of paper in her hands and an expression on her face that was not Eliza's usual sharp-eyed certainty, but something quieter and harder to read. What is that? Clara said. Eliza set it on the table and slid it across without speaking. It was a note, written in a careful, educated hand on good paper, the kind that cost more than general store stock. It was addressed to Clara, not to Wade, not to Hank, to Clara. And it said, in 8 precise sentences, that Edgar North had become aware of certain claims being circulated regarding his property and his conduct, that he considered these claims to be without foundation and potentially defamatory, that he had instructed his attorney to pursue appropriate remedies should these claims be repeated to any county official, and that he wished to extend, in the spirit of neighborly goodwill, an invitation for Miss Holt to meet with him privately at his property on Thursday morning to discuss the matter before it became unnecessarily complicated for everyone involved. Thursday morning. The same morning Sheriff Colton was coming to document the channel. "Where did you get this?" Clara said. "A man brought it to the door this morning, before you were up."
Eliza looked at her mother. "He said it was for the new woman at the Broken Spur. He was polite about it. He tipped his hat." She paused. "I didn't like him." "Did you tell Wade?" "No, I came straight inside and waited for you." Clara folded the note and put it in her pocket, and looked at her daughter for a moment. 12 years old, and she had brought it directly to her mother, and not to the man of the house, and had sat here waiting instead of going back to bed. That was not a small thing. "You did right," Clara said. Eliza's shoulders dropped slightly. She'd been holding them up without knowing it. "He's trying to scare you," she said. "He's trying to separate me," Clara said, "which is different from scaring me, and more dangerous." She went to the stove and started the coffee. "It means he's done some thinking about how this ranch works, and he's decided I'm either the weakest point or the most dangerous one." "Which are you?" Clara looked at her daughter over her shoulder. "What do you think?" Eliza thought about it with the genuine consideration she gave to real questions. "The most dangerous one," she said. "Because you have the documentation, and you're the one who identified the contamination, and you're the one who convinced the sheriff to come tomorrow." "That's right. So he wants to get to you before tomorrow." "That's right." "Are you going to meet with him?" "No." "Are you going to tell Wade?" "Yes, right now." Clara poured the coffee and handed one cup to Eliza, who accepted it with the dignity of a person being given something they'd earned. "Stay inside this morning until I come back." "I'm not a child who needs Eliza." Clara looked at her directly. "Stay inside. Not because you can't handle yourself. Because I need to know where you and Rose are while I'm talking to Wade, and I can't do 2 things at once." A pause. "Fine," Eliza said. "But I want to know everything after." "You'll know what matters," Clara said, and went to find Wade. He was in the east pen with Flint, running his hands along the animal's flanks the way he'd been doing every morning, checking, assessing, the daily accounting of something that had nearly been lost and was being held on to carefully. He heard her coming and turned, and whatever he saw in her face made him straighten fully. "What happened?" he said. She gave him the note. He read it once fast, and then again slow, the way she'd learned he processed things that made him angry. Fast to get the shape of it, slow to make sure he had the details right. When he looked up, his eyes were flat and controlled, and very dark. "He sent it to you," he said, "not to me." "Yes." "He's trying to pull you out before Colton comes tomorrow." "Yes." "He thinks you'll—" He stopped. "He thinks you're the one I'm listening to." "He's right about that," she said. "Which means he's been watching this ranch more carefully than you knew." She took the note back and folded it. "He's also right that I'm the one with the documentation, which means he's not just trying to scare me, Wade.
He's trying to get me into a room where his lawyer can assess what I have and find holes in it before it reaches a judge." Wade turned away and took 3 steps toward the fence and stopped. She waited. She had learned the rhythm of this: the 3 steps, the fence, the pause while he brought himself back from the place his anger wanted to take him. He turned around. "What do we do?" "We don't respond to the note at all. Nothing written, nothing verbal." She met his eyes. "Responding tells him we're worried. Not responding tells him we're not." She paused. "And we send word to Colton tonight that North has made contact and attempted to intercept the documentation. That becomes part of the record." "Colton still coming tomorrow?" "He said 7 o'clock. I'm going to hold him to it." Wade looked at the note in her hands. "You're not frightened?" It was not quite a question. She answered it anyway. "I'm not frightened of Edgar North," she said. "I've been frightened of things in my life. Real things. Watching Walt's breathing change in the night, and knowing what that change meant. Putting my daughters on a train with $54 and a letter from a man I'd never met." She paused. "Edgar North is a bully with money and patience, and I have been dealing with men like that my entire life. They're only dangerous if you let them make you small." He looked at her for a long moment. "Has anyone ever made you small?" "They've tried," she said. "It didn't take." Something moved through his face. She was starting to be able to read the specific geography of it, where the exhaustion lived, and where the grief had made its permanent residence, and where, in the last 2 days, something new was beginning to find a place. "Clara," he said. "Wade." "When this is done," he stopped. "Start it again. When this is settled, and the sheriff has been, and the documentation is on record, and we know where things stand." He looked at his hands. "I'd like to talk to you about something." "All right," she said. "Not now, when it's settled." "All right." She held his eyes. "But you should know that I'm not going anywhere. Whatever it is you want to say, it doesn't have to be settled for me to still be here." He absorbed that. She watched him absorb it, carefully, the way he absorbed things that mattered. "I know that," he said. And from him, that was a great deal. Colton arrived at 7:10 the next morning with his deputy and a camera, and the younger man he introduced as the county land assessor, which told Clara that Colton had done his own thinking between Brentwood and the Broken Spur, and had decided to bring the right tools for what he expected to find. She approved of that. She gave Colton the note first, before she showed him anything else. He read it, handed it to the deputy, looked at Clara. "He sent this to you." "Yesterday morning. I have my daughter's account of when it was delivered and by whom." "You didn't respond?" "No." "Smart." He folded the note and put it in his coat pocket. "This becomes part of the record. Attempted contact with a witness before official documentation. A judge will have opinions about that." He looked at Wade. "All right, show me the channel." They walked the fence line, with the assessor taking measurements and the deputy making notes, and Colton moving slowly, looking at everything with the particular attention of a man who had been skeptical and was now revising. He crouched at the lateral cut and looked at it for a long time without touching anything. He looked at the boot prints. He looked at the direction of the water flow and at the distance to the well casing. And he looked at Hank's sketch, and he looked back at the cut. "This was dug deliberately," he said. "Not a question." "Yes," Clara said. "The direction of the cut puts the discharge pathway directly toward the Callister well casing. Within 30 yards. The soil composition here is loose sandstone over clay. Water moves laterally through it faster than in most ground." She pointed to the slight discoloration in the bank downstream. "That's residual chemical trace, consistent with the mineral toxicity I documented in the cattle." Colton looked at the assessor. The assessor crouched and looked and said, She's right about the soil, and that discoloration is not natural weathering. Colton stood up. He looked at the burlap sack caught on the root downstream, and he told the deputy to photograph it in place before touching it. The deputy photographed it. The assessor measured the distance from the cut to the well. Then Colton turned to Wade. This is north side of the fence line. Yes. No legitimate reason for a drainage cut here. No. The only thing this cut does is redirect water toward your well. Yes. Colton was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I'm going to need Pete Garner's formal statement about the chemical purchase. I'll go to town today, Hank said. I'll go with you, Colton said. Pete'll give it cleaner with a badge in the room. He turned back to Clara. Your medical documentation, the cattle records. 12 pages. I have a copy for you and a copy for the county clerk. She had made the second copy that morning before dawn, her handwriting precise and unhurried, because she had learned in the war that the copy you made for yourself was the one that mattered when the original went missing. Colton looked at her with the expression she was beginning to recognize from men who had underestimated her and were recalibrating. You made 2 copies. I made 3, she said. The third one goes with Hank to a locked box at the Brentwood Bank before the end of today. He almost smiled. The almost smile was becoming familiar. All right, he said. I'm going to ride to North's property this afternoon and inform him formally that a complaint has been filed and that the county is investigating. He paused. He's going to lawyer up immediately. He already has a lawyer, Clara said. Gerald Fitch out of Carson City. Colton looked at her. How do you know that? Dorothy Price mentioned it when I went to thank her for the cornbread. She paused. Dorothy Price knows everything that moves in this county, approximately as it moves. She does, Colton agreed. He put his hat back on. Fitch is expensive. North paid a lot of money to have that man on retainer. He looked at Wade. This is going to get complicated before it gets simple. I know, Wade said. North is going to counterclaim. He's going to say the cut was a drainage repair that predates your ownership. He's going to produce paperwork. Can he produce paperwork for something that didn't exist 2 years ago? Clara asked. He can try to produce paperwork for anything, Colton said. That's what expensive lawyers are for. He picked up his hat from where he'd set it on the fence post. But what he cannot produce is an explanation for that burlap sack, or for the fact that his own South Pond, which he claimed was the reason for the chemical purchase, shows no evidence of any treatment whatsoever. He looked at the cut one more time. I checked his pond last week. Clean as a whistle. The silence that followed had a particular quality. The quality of the moment when the pieces of something align and everyone in the room recognizes it at the same time. Wade said, You already looked at his pond? Before I came out here, Colton said. I'm an old man, Callister. I've been doing this since before North had money, and a man who buys chemicals for a pond that doesn't need treating is a man who had a different use for those chemicals. He paused. I wanted to see it for myself before I looked at anything else. Hank said, very quietly, I'll be damned. Colton picked up his bag. Get me those documents and Pete's statement before end of day. I'll have something on paper for the county judge by Monday. He nodded to Clara. Miss Holt? Sheriff? He walked to his horse. The deputy and the assessor followed. Clara watched them go, and then she turned and found both Eliza and Rose standing at the fence line 15 yards back, where they had apparently been for the last 20 minutes, watching everything with their respective brands of attention. Eliza's sharp and cataloging. Rose's wide-eyed and absolute. I told you to stay inside, Clara said. We were outside, Eliza said. That's technically different. You said inside the house, Rose said helpfully. We're inside the fence. That is not what I meant, and you know it." "You should be more specific," Eliza said, with the satisfied tone of a person who had found a technicality and intended to live there. Clara looked at her daughters, standing at the fence in the morning light. Rose with her hand on Captain's head, and Eliza with her arms crossed and her chin up in the exact posture Clara recognized from her own mirror, and she felt something loosen in her chest. Not the slow release of last night's tension, but something older, something that had been clenched since Missouri. Since before Missouri. Since a long time before she had sold everything Walt left and put her daughters on a train into the unknown. She was still looking at them when she felt Wade stop beside her. "Your older one," he said. "She's going to be formidable." "She already is," Clara said. "I'm just the only one who can still tell her what to do." "For how much longer?" "Honestly, another year, maybe less." She paused. "She's going to need more room than I could give her back in Missouri. She needs land and work and something real to push against." She glanced at him. This place could give her that. He looked at Eliza, at Rose, back at Clara. "I'd like that," he said, simply. She didn't answer with words. She didn't need to. The afternoon turned hard an hour later when Hank came back from town without Pete Garner's statement. He came back instead with Pete Garner himself, and Pete Garner had a bruise coming up along his jaw and a look in his eye that was equal parts anger and fear. And he sat down at Clara's kitchen table and put his hat in his hands and said, without preamble, "North's man came to see me this morning, before the sheriff got there." Wade went very still. "Dellard. Dellard and two others I didn't know." Pete looked at his hat. "They didn't touch me. Not exactly." Dellard just put his hand on the counter and leaned in and said that a man who made accusations he couldn't support had a way of finding his business dried up. He touched the bruise on his jaw. "One of the others bumped into me on the way out. That was the only contact." The kitchen was very quiet. "Pete," Wade said, "I'm sorry." "It ain't your fault," Pete said. "I knew what I was doing when I talked to Hank. I knew North might hear about it." He looked up. "I'm not taking it back. I just want you to know what's sitting on the other side of me, saying it out loud." Clara sat down across from him. "Pete, will you give the statement to Sheriff Colton directly? Today, in his office, with him present?" "Colton know about this morning?" "He will in the next hour." Pete was quiet for a moment. He was a round-faced man of about 50, with honest eyes and the look of someone who had spent a long time being careful and was in the process of deciding to stop. "If I give the statement official, North's not going to stop at a bump in the shoulder." "No," Clara said. "He's not. I won't lie to you about that." She held his eyes. "But if you don't give it, he gets to keep doing what he's doing. To Wade. To the next man he decides wants something he has. To whoever is after that." She paused. "You said you felt bad about selling him those chemicals. You said you'd been thinking about it. This is how you stop thinking about it." Pete looked at his hat for a long moment. Then he looked at Wade. "11 head," he said. "Yes," Wade said, "because of what I sold him. Because of what he did with what you sold him. That's different." Pete set his hat on the table. "I'll give the statement." Clara nodded. "Hank will ride with you." "I'll be fine on my own." "Hank will ride with you," she repeated. "Not because you need protecting, because I want a witness to the statement being given voluntarily and without interference." She looked at Hank. "Stay with him until it's filed." "Yes, ma'am," Hank said, and stood. After they left, the kitchen held the three of them, Clara, Wade, and the shape of what was happening, which had grown in the last hour from a legal dispute into something with teeth and reach that was going to require them to hold their positions carefully. Wade sat down. He hadn't sat down in most of the day, and the sitting had the quality of a man allowing himself to feel the weight he'd been carrying while standing. He put both hands flat on the table and looked at them. "North sent men to Pete's store," he said. "Yes." "While Colton was on his way here." "Yes." "He moves fast when he's cornered." His voice was very quiet. "What does he do next?" "He's going to try to discredit the documentation," Clara said. "My documentation specifically. He's going to argue I have no medical authority, no formal credentials, and no legal standing to make a contamination diagnosis." She sat across from him. "He's not wrong that I have no formal credentials. I never claimed I did. So his lawyer builds a case that your diagnosis is amateur and inadmissible. He'll try. But the cattle are alive. The ones that were dying before I changed the water source are recovering. That's not an amateur result." She paused. "And the assessor documented the cut today. That's county record. That doesn't go away regardless of what anyone says about my credentials." Wade looked at her steadily. "Is there anything else he can use?" She understood what he was asking. He was asking it carefully, the way a man asked a question that might have an answer he wasn't sure he was ready for. "He's going to use me," she said. "The fact of me. Who I am and what I look like, and where I came from, and the arrangement here that isn't formal yet." She held his eyes. "He's going to stand in front of a judge and describe a large widow from Missouri with no credentials and no legal standing in this county, who arrived 10 days ago and is making accusations on behalf of a man she has no formal relationship with. He's going to make it sound like I'm an unreliable narrator with a personal interest." Wade's jaw was tight. Let him try. He's going to do more than try. He's going to be effective at it. For a time. She leaned forward. "Which is why I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer it honestly." He looked at her. "Ask." She held his gaze. "Is what you wanted to say to me, what you said you wanted to say when this was settled, is it something that could be said sooner?" The kitchen was completely still. He understood exactly what she was asking. She watched him understand it, watched him sort through it. Not just the practical implications, which were obvious, but the real question underneath, which was whether the thing he'd been carrying toward her since the platform was true enough and solid enough to say out loud in the middle of the worst week of his life, without it being something he'd regret when the week was over. He looked at his hands on the table. Then he looked at her. "I told you when I wrote that advertisement," he said slowly, "that I was thinking practically." He paused. "I also told you I was wrong about that." "You did?" "I meant it." He looked at her directly. "Clara, what I want to say to you is not contingent on the week being over. It was true on day 2, and it's true now, and it'll be true when this is settled." He held her eyes. "I'd like to call the preacher, if you're willing. Not for North, and not for the documentation, and not for any reason that has to do with Edgar North at all." She looked at him for a long moment, at the man who had built 60 acres into a ranch by sleeping in a bedroll, who had held his wife for 3 weeks and not slept, who had sent a letter that was careful and true, and not the whole picture, and had admitted that, and had not once in 10 days looked at her body before he looked at her. "I'm willing," she said. He nodded once, the nod of a man who had said the true thing and was steady with having said it. From the doorway, where she had been standing for an indeterminate amount of time, Rose said, in a very small and very sincere voice, "Does this mean we're staying?" Clara turned. Rose was in the doorway with Captain sitting at her feet, and her hands pressed together in front of her chest, in that prayer shape she did when she wanted something very much. "Yes," Clara said. "We're staying." Rose turned around and walked back out toward the barn, and they heard her say at full volume to Eliza, who was somewhere in the vicinity, "I told you she'd say yes." And Eliza's voice came back, dry and immediate. "I never said she wouldn't. I said I was waiting for confirmation." And Captain barked once, which seemed to settle the matter entirely. Wade looked at the doorway. Then he looked at Clara with an expression that had nothing managed about it. No layers, no control. Just the direct and unguarded face of a man who had not expected any of this when he stood on the Millhaven platform 10 days ago, and had been wrong about that in the best possible way. "Your daughters," he said. "I know," she said. "I'm sorry in advance for most of it." "Don't be," he said, and meant it completely. The preacher came on Saturday, not because anyone had arranged it exactly. Wade had ridden to find him Friday morning, and the preacher, a man named Samuel Cross, who served 3 counties out of a single saddlebag and had seen most things, had said he could come Saturday afternoon if the matter was urgent. Wade had said the matter was not urgent in the way of emergencies, but was urgent in the way of things that had waited long enough. And Samuel Cross had said that was the best kind of urgent, and he would be there by 2. What happened before 2 o'clock was the part none of them had planned for. North's lawyer arrived at 9:30. Gerald Fitch was a small, neat man in a coat that cost more than most men in Millhaven made in a month. And he came alone, which was its own kind of statement. A man confident enough in his paperwork that he didn't need muscle behind it. He knocked on the door of the ranch house, and when Clara opened it, he looked at her with the polite, assessing eyes of a man who had already been told exactly who she was, and had formed his opinion accordingly. "Miss Holt," he said, "I represent Edgar North. I'd like to speak with Mr. Callister." "Mr. Callister is occupied," Clara said. "You can speak with me." Something moved behind his eyes. Recalibration. "I think it would be better if Mr. Fitch." She held the door with one hand and looked at him with the steady, frank directness she used when she needed someone to understand immediately that she was not a door they could walk through. "I am the person who documented the contamination, identified the source, treated the affected cattle, provided the county sheriff with 12 pages of medical records, and accompanied Mr. Callister to Brentwood to file the complaint. If you have something to say about this matter, you have it to say to me as much as to him." She stepped back from the door. "Come in." He came in. She put coffee on without asking if he wanted it, and sat across from him at the kitchen table, and folded her hands and waited. He opened his leather case and produced a document that was several pages thick, and slid it across the table. "Mr. North is prepared to settle this matter without further county involvement," he said. "He is willing to offer a payment of $400 in acknowledgement of the cattle losses, contingent upon the withdrawal of the complaint filed with Sheriff Colton and a signed agreement that no further claims will be made regarding the channel on his property." Clara looked at the document. She did not pick it up. $400, she said. "It is a generous offer considering the—" "Mr. Fitch," she looked at him directly. 11 cattle at current market weight is approximately $650. The contamination treatment cost an additional $90. The loss of the south pasture irrigation, which Mr. North is contractually positioned to cut off, represents a seasonal loss of approximately $800 in grazing capacity. She paused. $400 is not a generous offer. It is an offer designed to make this go away for the least amount of money possible, while leaving Mr. North free to do the same thing to the next man whose land he wants. Fitch was quiet for a moment. "The county judge will not look favorably on claims made by a woman without medical credentials against a man of Mr. North's standing." The county judge will look at the assessor's measurements of a deliberately dug drainage cut on Mr. North's property, oriented directly toward Mr. Callister's well, Clara said. He will look at the chemical purchase record from Pete Garner, who has given a formal, sworn statement to Sheriff Colton. He will look at the fact that Mr. North's own pond, which he claimed to be treating with those chemicals, shows no evidence of any treatment whatsoever. She held Fitch's gaze. My credentials are one element of this case, Mr. Fitch. They are not the whole of it. And I think you know that, which is why you're sitting at this table on a Saturday morning, instead of waiting for Monday. Fitch looked at his document, the look of a man whose script had not accounted for this particular conversation. Mr. North is a patient man, he said carefully. He has resources, and he has time, and he is prepared to make this a protracted matter if, so are we. Wade's voice came from the hallway doorway. Clara had not heard him come in. Fitch startled slightly. Wade came into the kitchen and stood at the end of the table and looked at Fitch with the flat, controlled expression he used when his anger was load-bearing, and he was not going to put it down. My wife has explained our position, Wade said. Fitch looked between them. I wasn't aware there had been a, "We're being married this afternoon," Wade said. Which means anything done to this ranch is done to both of us. And anything done to either of us is done to both of us. He looked at the document on the table. Take that back to North. Tell him the offer is declined. Tell him we'll see him in front of the judge. Fitch picked up the document slowly. He put it back in his case with the movements of a man who was still calculating, still looking for the angle that hadn't been tried yet. He looked at Clara one more time. You understand what a prolonged legal dispute will cost you, financially and otherwise. I understand what letting this go will cost everyone who comes after us, Clara said. That costs more. He stood. He buttoned his coat. He looked at Wade. This could have been simple. It was never simple, Wade said. North just wanted us to think it was. Fitch left. They heard his horse on the road, and then the sound diminished, and the kitchen was quiet. Wade looked at Clara. My wife, he said. I said it before the preacher got here. You did. Is that all right? She looked at him steadily. You've been saying things before you're ready to say them since the day I arrived. I found it's one of your better qualities. She stood and picked up Fitch's untouched coffee cup. Go finish what you were doing. Samuel Cross will be here at 2, and I need to do something about this dress. He almost smiled. The almost smile was becoming her favorite of his expressions because it was the one that was entirely unguarded, the one that happened when something caught him before he could manage it. You look fine, he said. I look like a woman who has been treating sick cattle and fighting a land war for 10 days, she said. Go, I'll handle the dress. He went. She stood at the kitchen window for a moment and looked at the yard. At the east pen, where Flint was moving freely now, weight on all 4 legs, the particular fluid motion of an animal that had come back from something and was still a little surprised to find itself on the other side of it. At the fence line, Chester had rebuilt. At the barn, where Hank was doing what he was always doing, the steady, patient work of keeping a place running while everything else swirled around it. She thought about Walt. Not with grief exactly, not anymore, but with the honest acknowledgement that he had been a decent man who had loved her in his way and left her less than she needed, and that she did not hold the second part against him because he had not planned the leaving. She thought about what he would have made of this, of Nevada and the ranch and Wade Callister and the fight they were in the middle of. And she thought he would have said, Clara, you never could walk into a room without finding the hardest thing in it to fix, which would have been a complaint and a compliment in equal measure. And she would have told him that, and he would have laughed. She let herself have that moment. Then she set it down, the way she set down the things that were finished, with care and without apology, and she went to find her clean dress. Eliza was in the bedroom doorway when she came in. "Fitch left," Eliza said. "He did." "You sent him away." "We did." Eliza watched her mother pull the blue dress from the bag where she'd kept it since the train. The same dress she'd arrived in, washed and pressed until it was as close to its original color as it was ever going to get. "Is that what you're wearing?" "It's the best I have." "It's the one you arrived in." "I know. That seems right to me." Clara shook it out and looked at it. The things worth keeping usually start on the first day. Eliza was quiet for a moment. Then she said, in the voice she used when she was saying something that cost her something, "He's good to you." "He is." "He listens to you." "He does." "Papa listened to you too." She paused. "But different." Clara looked at her daughter. "Different how?" "Papa listened like he was waiting for the part where you'd be wrong, so he could fix it." Eliza met her mother's eyes. "Wade listens like he's waiting for the part where you're right, so he knows what to do next." Clara stood still for a moment. 12 years old. She was going to be extraordinary and impossible in equal measure, and Clara was already grateful for both. "Come here," Clara said. Eliza came. Clara put both hands on her daughter's face, the way she had since Eliza was small enough to hold in one arm, and she looked at her and said, "Your father loved us. He did his best. This is something different from that, and it doesn't make what he was less." "I know that," Eliza said. Then, more quietly, "I just wanted you to know I see it, that it's different." "I know you do." Clara pressed her forehead briefly to her daughter's. "Now go get your sister presentable. She has feed dust in her hair, and there's a preacher coming." Eliza went, with the brisk efficiency of someone given a task they could execute, and Clara heard her in the next room saying to Rose, "Come here, your hair is a disaster," and Rose saying, "It's not a disaster, it's natural," and Eliza saying, "It's naturally a disaster," and the familiar back and forth of it settled around Clara like the thing it was, the sound of her life, the specific music of these two people she had built from nothing and carried across a continent, and would carry further still if that was what was needed. Samuel Cross arrived at 2:05 on a gray horse, and got down with the easy, unhurried movement of a man who had performed ceremonies in fields and kitchens, and once, he mentioned, in a mine shaft in Colorado, when the groom had refused to come above ground until the vows were done. He was a tall man with kind eyes, and a voice that had done a great deal of work on people who needed to hear something true, and had found the right frequency for it. He looked at Wade and Clara standing on the porch and said, "I understand we're keeping this simple." "Simple as it gets," Wade said. "Simple is usually best." Cross looked at the assembled. Hank standing to Wade's left with his hat in both hands. Eliza standing to Clara's right, with her arms crossed, and her expression the one she wore when she was feeling something she didn't have words for yet. Rose standing beside Eliza, with Captain sitting obediently at her feet, because she had been working on that for 3 days, and this seemed like the right occasion to demonstrate it. Dorothy Price had appeared from somewhere around noon, with a pie and an expression that said she had not been invited, but also had not been uninvited, which was its own form of invitation. And she stood near the porch steps with the upright bearing of a woman attending something that mattered. Pete Garner was there too. He had ridden out after giving his statement to Colton, and had not explained why he'd come, and no one had asked, because the bruise on his jaw said everything that needed to be said about why a man who had done something costly and right deserved to be present for something good. Cross looked at Clara. He took in the whole of her, the blue dress, the set of her shoulders, the frank, steady eyes, with the unhurried attention of a man deciding what kind of ceremony these particular people needed. "Ready?" he said. "Been ready," she said. He smiled, a full one, not an almost. "Then let's begin." It was not a long ceremony. Cross was a man who understood that the meaning was in the people, not the words, and that the words were just the frame around something that was already there. He spoke about partnership and about the particular courage of people who chose to build something together when building alone was already hard enough. He spoke about children and about what it meant to choose not just a person, but a life, with everything that life contained. When he got to the vows, Wade turned to face Clara fully, and he said the words with the deliberate certainty of a man who had thought about each one before he said it, and meant all of them in full. Not performed, not managed, just true. When it was her turn, Clara looked at him, at the man who had listened to her, deferred to her judgment, cooked her eggs twice a day without complaint, run through the dark for charcoal when Flint's life needed it, said, "I'm glad you came," with no decoration and complete sincerity. And she said the words with the same plainness she brought to all true things, and meant them in the fullest possible sense. Not just the man, but the ranch, and the work, and the daughters, and the legal fight that wasn't over, and the frayed cuff on his best shirt, and the coffee that was always too strong, and however many more hard days were coming. When Cross said the final words, Hank's hat went into the air. It came down on Dorothy Price, who caught it without looking, and held it out to him with the expression of a woman who was unsurprised by everything, and pleased by most of it. Rose said with enormous satisfaction, "I knew it. I knew from the first day." "You did not know from the first day," Eliza said. "I knew from when Captain licked my hand. That was a sign." "The dog licking your hand is not a sign of—" "It was a sign," Rose said, with the serenity of a person who has decided a thing and does not require agreement. Captain barked once in what appeared to be confirmation. Pete Garner shook Wade's hand and then looked at Clara and shook her hand too. The firm, deliberate handshake of a man making a statement. "You did right by him," he said, "and by the rest of us. North's been moving people around this county for a long time. People been watching this week." "People have been watching her since the platform," Dorothy said, appearing at Clara's elbow with a slice of pie and the directness of a woman who had long since stopped preambling things. "I will tell you that the conversation in town has changed considerably since Monday." She pressed the pie into Clara's hands. "Eat this. You've been running on cornbread and determination for 10 days. "The cornbread was yours," Clara said. "It was excellent cornbread. Eat the pie, too." Sheriff Colton appeared at the edge of the yard in the late afternoon, still on horseback, still in his work coat, not dressed for a celebration, but not looking away from one either. He took his hat off when Clara looked at him. "Didn't want to intrude on the ceremony," he said, "but I've got something you'll want to hear." Wade came to stand beside Clara. "Fitch came to my office this morning," Colton said. "About an hour after he left here, I'd guess. He withdrew the water rights counterclaim." He paused. "North is not admitting to the contamination. His position is that the channel cut was a drainage repair predating the current ownership, and that the chemical purchase was for a different application." He looked at Clara directly. "But his lawyer advised him this morning that the physical evidence is substantial enough that pursuing a legal defense will cost him more than settling and withdrawing." "So he's withdrawing everything," Wade said. "The legal claim, yes. The county investigation into the deliberate contamination is still open. That's not his to withdraw." Colton put his hat back on. "He's going to have an uncomfortable conversation with the judge about the chemical purchase and the drainage cut, regardless of what his lawyer does. That conversation is going to be expensive for him." He paused. "Not as expensive as 11 dead cattle and a nearly destroyed ranch." But something. Something is more than nothing, Clara said. Yes, ma'am, Colton said. It generally is. He looked at the gathering on the porch, at Dorothy and Pete and Hank, at the girls, at Wade standing beside Clara in his best shirt with the frayed cuff. Congratulations, he said simply. You've earned it. He turned his horse and rode, and they watched him go until the sound of the hooves faded into the evening. The light was going long and amber over the Nevada ground by the time the last of the guests had gone, and the yard was quiet, and the girls were inside. Rose, already half asleep at the kitchen table, with Captain at her feet. Eliza, reading by the lamp with the focused silence she went into when she was processing the day. Hank had gone to the barn to do the last check on the cattle, which he would always do, every evening, regardless of ceremony or celebration or anything else, because that was what Hank did and who he was, and why the broken spur was still standing. Clara and Wade sat on the porch steps in the cooling air, and neither of them spoke for a while, because there was nothing that needed saying immediately, and they had both learned that rushing a silence was a way of missing what it contained. Then Wade said, "Nort's not finished." "No," Clara said. "He's not. He'll find another angle, another way to come at the water rights or the boundary or something else we haven't thought of yet." "Probably." "That doesn't worry you?" "It concerns me," she said, "which is different from worry. Worry is what you do when you think you can't handle what's coming. Concern is what you do when you're paying attention." She looked at him. "We're paying attention." He was quiet for a moment. "The cattle go to the Stockton run in 3 weeks. If they make weight, we cover the irrigation payment and the operating costs and come out with something left over. If they make weight." "Flint walked the paddock on his own for 2 hours today," she said. "He'll make weight." "You sound sure of that." "I am sure of that. I stayed up 2 nights for that animal." She paused. "I don't lose things I stay up for." He turned to look at her in the last of the evening light. "Is that true?" She looked back at him. "What do you think?" He thought about Flint standing on his own 4 feet. He thought about Pete Garner with a bruise on his jaw, sitting at the kitchen table anyway. He thought about Colton riding out on a Saturday morning with his deputy and his camera because a woman with 12 pages of documentation had looked at him and said, "Tomorrow, early." He thought about Eliza with her arms crossed and her measuring eyes, and Rose with her absolute faith and her instinct for names, and the dog who had apparently been waiting for someone to find out what he was actually called. He thought about a platform in Millhaven on a Tuesday afternoon, and a woman stepping off a train into the full weight of a town's judgment, and walking toward him with her chin up and her hand out, and the direct, simple words, "I believe you've been expecting me." "I think," he said, "that you are the most capable person I have ever met in my life." She looked at him steadily. "That is a practical observation." "It is," he said. "And I also think—" He stopped. Started again the way he started when the thing he was saying mattered enough that he needed to get it right. "I think that when I wrote that letter about practical things, I was telling the truth as far as it went. I needed someone capable. I needed someone who could do the work." He looked at his hands. "What I didn't say, because I didn't have the right to say it yet, was that I had been alone for 4 years, and the alone had become something I'd almost made my peace with. Almost." He looked at her. "And then you stepped off that train, and in 10 days you gave my cattle back their lives, and gave this ranch back its future, and gave me back the thing I've almost finished convincing myself I was done needing." The evening settled around them. From the barn, faint and steady, they could hear Hank's voice talking to the horses the way he did every night. low and unhurried, the voice of a man telling animals they were safe. "I wasn't looking for this either," Clara said. "I was looking for solid ground. Somewhere my daughters could grow without being diminished. Somewhere I could work without apologizing for taking up space." She paused. "I wasn't looking for you specifically." "I know. But here you are." "Here I am." He held her eyes.
"Is that all right?" She looked at him for a long moment. At the man who had built something real out of nothing, who had lost the thing that mattered most and kept working anyway, who had listened to her on the first day and every day after, and had not once tried to make her smaller than she was. She thought about all the rooms, in all the places she had occupied, where she had felt the specific cold of being too much and not enough simultaneously. She thought about the platform and the stairs and the woman who had said, "That's what he sent for," and the 12-year-old stride of Eliza keeping pace beside her. She thought about Flint lifting his head in the dark, about Wade running through the rain for charcoal without asking if it was going to work, about Rose pressing both hands together in a prayer over a sick animal she had known for one day because she believed absolutely that the people she loved could save things. "Yes," Clara said. "It's more than all right." He put his arm around her, and she leaned into him with the solid, uncomplicated ease of a woman who had decided this was where she was and was entirely finished apologizing for wanting to be somewhere. From inside, Rose's sleepy voice drifted out through the screen door. "Captain, come here." A pause. "Captain, I said come here." Another pause. "He's not coming," she announced, to no one in particular. "He'll come when he's ready," Eliza said, without looking up from her book. "When will he be ready?" "When he decides to be." "That's not helpful." "It's accurate." Clara closed her eyes for one moment and listened to her daughters and the horses in the barn and the Nevada evening settling into the particular quiet it had at this hour, and she thought that this was what solid ground felt like. Not perfect, not finished. Not without the hard days that were still coming, because North was still out there, and the law moved slowly, and the cattle had 3 weeks to make weight, and the cracked window in the kitchen still needed fixing. But Flint was walking. The springs on the northeast pasture were documented and defended. The sheriff had his evidence, and Pete had his statement. And Fitch had taken his settlement offer back to the man who had sent it, and been told no clearly and without hesitation. And Clara May Holt, Clara Callister now, the name settling on her like something she had been moving toward without knowing it, had her daughters in a house that was hers, on land that was going to stay hers, beside a man who had looked at her on a platform in Millhaven and seen, not what the rest of that platform had seen, not the size or the luggage or the 2 children or the wear on her dress, but the thing underneath all of it. The thing she had carried her entire life without anyone bothering to look for it. She had come to Nevada with $54 and a leather bag, and the quiet, unbreakable knowledge that she was worth more than every room she had ever been turned out of. She had been right about that. She had always been right about that. It had just taken the right piece of ground and the right man standing on it for the rest of the world to catch up.